Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the WE3Live series. I'm Dylan Lockwood. We've got a great talk today with NYPA's Rebecca Hughes, and to start that conversation, I will hand it off to my good friend and coworker, Jason Rodriguez. Take it away, Jason.
Thank you, Dylan. Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for being here for another episode of WE3Live. We have an amazing topic, iconic canals and climate change. Today's guest is Rebecca Hughes. She has 15 years of clean energy. She's been in the clean energy space for 15 years, leading workforce development programs for NYSERDA, and now she's with the New York Power Authority, and now in a new role, the New York State Canal Corporation. Rebecca, thank you so much for being here today. How are you doing?
I'm good, Jason. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good. Like, we collaborated before and got to know some of the work you were doing there at NYPA. So it's exciting to now be able to share some of the work you're doing with the Canal Group. Before, as in WE3Live tradition, we want to take a few questions just to get to know you a little better. So are you ready for the speed round?
I think so.
All right, so first question, did energy find you or did you find energy?
Oh, that's a good one. I would say that energy really found me. My first job after graduating with a degree in political science, I was just focused on, an office job and benefits, and it was just kind of this indirect path into energy. But I think I found some special footing, just because when you combine your work with your passion, it just makes it so much more energizing to go to work each day.
So what advice would you give to a young you just entering this field?
It's funny, I've been thinking about this. I think for a while I kind of grappled with this role as like a non-technical person in an energy space that's really inundated with engineers and super smart subject matter experts. And I think it's only in like the last couple of years I've really settled into this value of having soft skills and that customer centricity. And I think I would definitely tell my younger self or anybody with this kind of liberal arts background that you're needed too. And that communication element is so critical in the energy space. You don't have to be an engineer or a scientist to work in here.
Wonderful. So another one is, what was the worst haircut you ever had?
Oh my gosh, that's an easy one. I had what I call the front perm in we'll call it the early 90s. I was probably like 12 years old. And I had a perm that was just like this part of my hair forward. So it was interesting. And I thought it was awesome.
Yeah. You have to rock that with some enthusiasm. Next time we'll make sure to get the photo in advance.
I think they've all been burned now, but
got it. So moving on. So our last one. So what's your favorite media show that or show you're watching or listening to these days, and why?
I'm always a fan of the Energy Gang podcast. Just an awesome way to stay up to date on what's happening in our industry and, that kind of multifaceted view. But I've been really enjoying some Ted Lasso on Apple TV lately. So I don't know for anybody who's not familiar with it. I've been using it as kind of like my guide to leadership. You'll have to check it out if you're not familiar, but I think I've just been at this time when there's so much going on in the world, getting a ton of joy just from seeing, how powerful kindness can be. And that, it's been good. It's been impacting my life more than I thought that a comedy could.
Well, it sounds like a great article, that Ted Lasso's leadership lessons, and we'll be on the lookout for your edition of that too.
Okay.
Well, let's get into some of those questions. But first off, I know you're in New York there. I just want to see if, how are things there? We know there's been lots of rain, and just see if you had an update on that.
Thank you. So areas that were inundated last night, we're so bombarded with these images of climate change lately between the fires and the impacts, of the hurricane on Louisiana. And then just to have this right on our doorstep now and to see people suffering, it's awful. And I'm sure NIPA will be sending crews down there to help out as much as we can.
Well, great to hear that you're safe. And it sounds like there's a good recovery effort going on, and hopefully everyone's staying safe. So first of all, can you tell us a little bit about the Canal Corporation for those who are not familiar?
Sure, I think that's probably most people. So the Canal Corporation is a New York State agency. We're basically responsible for the whole, state canal system. It's over 500 miles of canals, and you can think of a canal as like an artificial river. So the Erie Canal is the most famous one in New York State. You might know the old, Bob Dylan song about the Erie Canal. That's the most familiar thing to most people. And that's about 360 miles. And it's this waterway that connects the Hudson River with the Great Lakes in the west. The Erie Canal is like 360 miles. And, without getting too deep into the history, basically the Erie Canal was this vessel that enabled the westward expansion. So it was originally this commercial waterway that provided this industrial route for goods to move from, really the original colonies toward the west. And it also paved the way for, the Second Great Awakening, just a really interesting journey to learn about it.
Fantastic. So now moving into WE3, right? We focus a lot on water energy issues here. So maybe can you expand a little bit of like what role does the canal system play in terms of the water energy nexus?
So, I think when we talk about the water energy nexus, generally, like the most traditional definition is the water that's used to create energy. So water that's captured and treated and disposed of. So, for the purpose of today's conversation, I'm going to take a slightly broader definition. And I'll talk a little bit about, water in terms of climate change and the way that, the role that water plays in more of a climate resilient world. So along the canal system, all of those super disruptive weather patterns that we've seen across the country yesterday with the impacts on New York City, certainly all of those more extreme weather events have impacts on the canal system. And it was built almost 200 years ago. So all of those assets that we have along the canal system, waste weirs, locks, dams, all of those assets are being used well beyond their useful life. So we're at this really interesting place where we have the opportunity to not only think about how to be stewards of this as we make improvements to really shore up the asset, that we're also making sure that it's making our communities more resilient, reducing the risk of flooding and aspects like that.
Thank you. Yeah, in terms of like this broader thinking and approach to us, and how we bring in mutual benefits. So, can you maybe provide some of those examples?
Blasted through rock and stone through mountains that are like 50 or 60 feet deep, and then there's portions that have to be built up so that they're kind of at sea level. And in Western New York, a lot of the canal is built up on what we call earthen embankments. So they're 50 or 60 feet above communities. So of course you can think about what the repercussions would be if there were a failure in one of those earthen embankments. So, when we're thinking about Western New York and shoring up those dams, those water impounding structures made of earth fall in central, eastern, southern New York. And then Western New York, is facing a very different climate reality. So we've got over 100 pumps that now serve thousands of acres of farmland. Can we expand that? Can we think differently about the role that the canal plays? It's no longer this industrial engine, it's more of a recreational tool, but can it be used also for resilience and maybe wetlands restoration? And we also can control the flows from that section. So we can let water out into creeks and tributaries, and we can very decisively support fisheries and other aspects of wildlife restoration. So, I think those things in terms of climate resilience are so critical. You look at the water shortages in the Colorado River right now, and there are massive repercussions for water shortages when it comes to agriculture. So we need to think at a systems level about that. And I would say, that food scarcity impacts on agriculture. Those are the things that keep me up the most when it comes to climate change.
Yeah, that is a lot in terms of how you get that out there. But just a quick follow up there because it's so complex and it can be really hard to digest, as you mentioned earlier. So, what are the challenges to communicating to different stakeholder groups, particularly maybe even just the typical consumer?
Um, I mean, so my role within Canal Corporation is focused on public relations. So it's interesting when you're talking about an aging asset and all of these, people tend to focus on what's right in their backyard. So if the water levels are high, they're seeing flooding. If the water levels are low, they're seeing drought. So when we talk about community engagement, I think the perennial challenge and the opportunity is to take this complex, multifaceted scenario where we've got this historic asset, these opportunities for resilience, and to make that relevant for people so that they feel, connected to the work that we're doing, so that they understand the far-reaching benefits. Um, but the reality is it's challenging. It's kind of a retail business.
Yeah, certainly challenging there. You mentioned the flood mitigation a little earlier. Can you maybe talk about some of the work you guys are doing there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's again this interesting dynamic where we've got drought in the western portion of the state. And then along the eastern portions of the Mohawk River, we see, really mounting flooding events, especially since I think 2011 when we saw Tropical Storm Lee that breached the Mohawk River. So the Mohawk River is part of the canal system. We call it a canalized river. We've got a whole system of locks and dams along the river so that we can control flows. It's part of this whole system. And we can control flooding by lifting portions of the dam. So basically we can empty out this massive river to create extra capacity for when creeks and rivers experience weather events and these massive flows. So basically it's about water management. So that's one key role that we play. We're not built as a flood management system, but we're really trying to optimize those benefits. And then in the wintertime, ice jams along the Mohawk River can also lead to flooding in cities like Schenectady. So we've been piloting something called an icebreaker, not like the questions that you asked me to start out today, but a physical vessel or boat that's kind of pointed in the front and actually turns through the river, breaks up the big chunks of ice so that they don't get dammed up and create flooding that way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Amazing. Quick follow-up question, just to set some context too, on in terms of how is a canal corporation, like, is there uh, a regulatory body that oversees it, or is that maybe done to the state?
Well, that's an interesting question. So the Canal Corporation, it's interesting. It's been moved from one state agency to another. It's kind of an oddball in terms of a state asset. So in 2017, the Canal Corporation was moved from the Thruway Authority, where it was being supported with roadway regulated. We are a state that is part of the Federal Dam Safety Program. So we have regulation from DEC when it comes to monitoring the many, many dams across our system. And then, of course, as part of a utility company, it creates an interesting dynamic because of course, as a utility, the power authority is FERC compliant. So we meet those federal standards. And I think that's been probably the biggest shift for Canals coming over to a utility is that we're taking this very, very strict, safe and secure approach.
It's here, so we'll encourage any audience members there to definitely submit some questions. And for Rebecca, if you had any over the next few minutes, and we'll try to get to them here at the end. Now, coming back to energy, you mentioned hydro. So has the Canal Corporation ever considered hydro projects on the canal?
Yeah, we do have hydro projects on the canal. At Cohoes Falls, I believe we're producing about 50 megawatts there, so it's not insignificant. But there are tons and tons of much smaller hydro projects all along the canal system. I believe somewhere in the neighborhood of like 28 hydro projects, a range of municipal versus privately owned. And that's another area where that control of flows can help to either, to maximize the outputs for hydroelectric generation, or where we can help to protect those assets during extreme weather events by controlling flows and, monitoring the CFS and providing that data to the hydro providers.
Wow. So another follow-up question there, because I know you've spent time on the clean energy side, previously in your role in NYPA, but what are some of these emerging technologies you see coming into the work you're doing there at the Canal Corporation? For example, there's obviously there's a lot of technology coming in there, whether it's analytics, sensing, AI. Where are you seeing some of these new technologies in the current work you're doing?
I'm definitely seeing benefits of kind of what we call shared services with the power authority. So one example is that we can use drone technology that we use to inspect our hydro dams, to inspect portions of the canal that would be otherwise really difficult to reach. One really interesting area where I saw, kind of Canals and NYPA come together is we had this gear that failed at Lock 17 in Little Falls, New York. It's about 7 feet high. It was built about 100 years ago in Philadelphia, and a tooth broke off from that gear. And so we had to, first of all, have our engineers figure out how do you take apart this lock, in a way that's safe and secure. We brought in a 400-ton crane to lift and lower, the lock gates while the repair was underway. And then our colleagues in the digital worker program actually used 3D scanning technology to model the replacement tooth. And we used a great machine shop out of Utica, New York to fabricate the tooth. But that use of 3D technology actually took weeks off the repair. And keep in mind, there are vessels, that's what we call boats in the canal world, that were stranded waiting to go through that lock. There was no way to tow them out. So we had like a dozen boats sitting for like a week and a half, 2 weeks that could have turned into a month. So, I think that's a great example of where, NYPA's digital tech really helped to expedite. And I'll also note just, for interest on the canal system, those vessels that were waiting, a lot of people actually come out from, the Caribbean or Florida and go all the way to the Great Lakes, and the Erie Canal provides, that continuity and that route for them. So even though the canal had this really glorious industrial past, it's really more of a recreation way now. And it's got the Empire State Trail, which is a bike path along the entire side. So when we think about the next 100 years of the canal system, we're thinking about it in terms of recreational tourism and, making sure that that asset is still in place for people to enjoy in this really different way.
Wow. Another question is to keep the continuity is, previously, for those who don't know, you led all the e-mobility initiatives there and still have a foot out there. But what was like the mindset transition going from that role now into this whole new world of water? So that's can you maybe talk about some of those challenges, but maybe also some of the skills developed on the electric side that you're able to bring that have really helped you in this new role?
I mean, I think, coming back to that icebreaker question about what I would tell my younger self, I think that I've been like doing what I call the human things in the tech world for my entire career. So in that way, I'm constantly used to like learning a new vocabulary, new technology, like using vessel instead of boat. So I think my whole career trajectory has kind of set me up well to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's certainly been the case with the transition from, more traditional NYPA businesses over to, canals. I'm constantly taking this technical information and making it simple so that people can feel like it's more accessible and more inclusive. So I think that that's been a common thread. Yeah. And I think just customer centricity too, like meeting people where they're at in tech, in energy especially. We can be guilty of knowing that we're right because we're right. And we expect people to just recognize that and come to us instead of meeting them where they are and understanding, what's the problem we're solving, for whom are we solving it. I think those are questions I ask myself in every job. And that's definitely true, at Canal Corporation, at least as much as it was at NYPA.
So did this, when you transition there and you're still now in there, Did it actually change kind of how you viewed the climate change conversation? Did it give you some more perspective, seeing how vast and how intricate it is in the current work you're doing?
I mean, I'll never look at rain the same. You can, if you're working on a canal system or a
Yeah.
waterway, you're never going to just enjoy a rainy day. You're always thinking about, could this overtop a spillway? Could this have flooding potential? So I certainly am much more dialed into that aspect of climate change, the immediacy of what it means for communities. Um, it- I think that I've always thought a lot about, that our resources are finite and that so much of our world is kind of built on this theory that, our whole economy is built on this theory that resources are essentially infinite, right? And I think just understanding more about water and paying more attention to the way that water impacts our ability to have quality of life and food sources and, watching the wildfires in California, I think I just have a more holistic view of, the potential impacts of climate change and what's happening now.
Has it changed anything of how you view like this, just your own water consumption within your home, or maybe how you communicate that to your kids?
I mean, not necessarily. I mean, honestly, if you think about the scale of water that's needed for industrial purposes, including industrial farming, like it's very different from the level of
Mhm.
water that we're consuming at home. I do have a 17-year-old son, so I'm very conscious of his 40-minute showers and like, yelling at him while he's in there. But no, it's, I think it's just that more holistic view, not necessarily something that hits home in that way.
Got it. So I think we've talked about several of these before, but putting your creative PR hat again, looking out forward to, because I think our end goal, all of us here, is to help address that climate change and close that gap. And but we're going to need lots of young people engaged early. So, what are some of the creative maybe ideas, maybe not necessarily working on that we can maybe think about as a whole, that we can start bringing into our wheelhouse in this broader energy water sector, that you think that we could leverage, that could really be beneficial to help consumers buy in, and maybe particular even younger consumers?
I mean, I think that's it. I think we have to really create space for creative people to come into, careers in this water and energy space. We're so engineering focused and so solution focused that we're not often thinking about human behavior. How do people learn? How do people adapt? We all have this very extreme present bias. It's hard for us as humans to think long term. So how do we start to, use that understanding of the way that behavior change works to really, I think, again, meet people where they are, not expect them to rise to us, learn our jargon, learn all of our acronyms. I think that's really the key to inclusivity and having a more diverse workforce, not just in terms of, people's ethnicities and religion and background, but also a diversity of skills is so critical, to creating something that's not niche, that doesn't feel like you're, a quote tree hugger or someone who's, you know, on the cusp of this like early adopter phase. How do we achieve this mass market approach to climate change where we're all bought in and where we're solutioning together? And I think that's, I'm so excited to see what the next generation brings to this, because I think we have a real present bias too. We're thinking in more limited terms, and there's definitely a need for more creativity and big thinking.
Got it. So I think we have time for maybe one more question, but in terms of on the cyber front, and obviously we're very aware of like getting the hackers on the electric grid, but do you also see those threats in the canal work you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, security is top of mind. At the Power Authority, we've really combined our physical security with our cyber security for really great real-time awareness. And just as our cyber systems are, potential vulnerability on the power grid, our assets are as well. And that's true on the canal too. So, when we're running pilots on things like the icebreaker that we talked about. We're doing that with support from the Army Corps of Engineers, but some of our data has to be kept, redacted or confidential because water resources are also a potential, target for threats. And we're not a highly digitized system. We do use gauges, sensors, meters, of course, but, it's more of a physical security than cybersecurity for canals.
Okay, got it. Well, Rebecca, time has flown by once again, and I certainly learned a lot. And we really appreciate you bringing this conversation to the WE3 audience, because it really, I know personally, and probably for our audience, we got to broaden our scope of how we think of the water energy nexus, and that's what's needed if we're going to truly address these really key challenges ahead of us that are already here, and they're not somewhere in the future. So we really appreciate the work you're doing, and thank you so much for being a guest today.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.